Think about this for a second. A teenager, already trying to figure out who they are, and then bam, they land in a totally new country.
Yeah, different language, different school, just a completely different vibe.
It's like their whole world gets flipped upside down while they're still building it.
And that's exactly the complex journey we're digging into today. We're taking a deep dive into how adolescent identity, well, how it forms and shifts when international migration is part of the picture.
Right, and we've gathered some really interesting stuff to help us understand it better. We're looking at posts from people in international schools, some broader social research.
And also this really specific, quite powerful study focusing on Latin American teens who moved to London.
So a good mix of perspectives.
Definitely. And our aim here really is to unpack the key factors influencing how these young people navigate, their sense of self, belonging, their future, all in this new setting. We want to give you, the listener, a much clearer view of these dynamics.
Okay, let's dive in. One of the first things that really jumps out is this idea that identity isn't static, especially for teenagers in a new place.
Mm-hmm. It's constantly being shaped, reshaped. Someone who really explored this is Stephen Castles. His work suggests our identities aren't fixed things at all.
They evolve.
Exactly. They evolve through, well, our interactions, our experiences. And this is already a big deal during adolescence, right? That's a prime time for self-discovery.
Absolutely.
So now imagine layering the complexity of a whole new culture on top of that.
It must intensify everything. Our sources talk about these things called cultural scripts. What are those exactly?
Well, think of them as the unwritten rules, the values, the norms, the ways of doing things that a society kind of runs on.
Things you don't even notice in your home country, maybe.
Precisely. They're
Uh,
just in the background. But when a teenager moves, suddenly these scripts are front and center. They notice how people greet each other differently, what's seen as polite, even what jokes land or don't land.
Right, the subtle stuff and the bigger things too, like what schools emphasize or what the community values,
All of it. So they're constantly encountering these new ways of being.
which must lead to a lot of adjustment. The sources call it identity negotiation, is that right?
That's the term, yeah. Identity negotiation. It's this continuous process, like a dance almost. You're adjusting your behavior, how you communicate.
While maybe trying to hold on to values from back home.
Exactly that. It's not about picking one or the other necessarily. And this negotiation, it happens everywhere in the classroom, hanging out with friends, just being out in the community. They're always kind of observing, learning, adapting.
So it really challenges that older idea, doesn't it? The one where immigrants were just expected to, I don't know, completely assimilate and forget their past.
Oh, definitely. Castles himself moved away from that simple assimilation model. He talked more about layered or hybrid identities forming.
Layered identities. How does that work in practice?
Well, think about those teens in international schools, for instance. They might pick up new ways of speaking, maybe get into local sports or hobbies, start seeing global issues from a new angle.
And they integrate these things into who they already were.
Exactly. They weave it all together. It's not about losing the old self. It's about adding new layers, creating something unique.
And that brings us to hybrid identity.
Yes, that unique blend. It's their background, their ethnicity maybe, their family's values, plus all this new cultural knowledge and experience they're gaining.
And the key thing, our sources seem to say, is that being comfortable navigating multiple cultures isn't a weakness.
Not at all. It's actually a real strength. It's not about being confused or lost. It's about having a wider repertoire, being adaptable.
Okay, another huge factor that comes up is technology and how it keeps these teens connected to their home countries.
Yes, Castles' work on transnationalism is really relevant here. He highlighted how migrants often keep really strong ties to home.
And technology just puts that on steroids for today's teenagers, right?
It really supercharges it. Social media, WhatsApp, video calls, they can be in almost constant touch with family and friends back home.
It creates this feeling of living in multiple places simultaneously. The term used is multi-local self.
That's it. This idea of a multi-local self, feeling a sense of belonging in more than one place. Now, this can be incredibly positive, really enriching.
But there's always a but.
Well, it can also bring challenges. Teenagers might feel, pulled between different sets of expectations, or they might feel kind of in between, not quite fitting fully here or there.
I can see that. It sounds like this whole migration experience, even with its potential upsides, can take a significant emotional toll.
Our sources really emphasize this emotional dimension. Feeling disconnected from your home culture, it can lead to loneliness, feeling like you don't belong, sometimes even resentment.
And schools, surprisingly maybe, can be places where these feelings really surface.
Sadly, yes. And research backs this up. That London study on Latin American youth and other studies, like in the US, they show higher rates of anxiety and depression among migrant adolescents.
And it's not just about feeling homesick, is it? Discrimination seems to play a big part too.
A huge part. You look at research from Germany, for example, on Turkish migrant teens, there's a clear link shown between experiencing discrimination and having poorer mental health.
So negative experiences from the outside world really impact their internal well-being.
Deeply, it really underlines that connection.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to something absolutely fundamental. Language.
Ah, yes. Language is critical. Our sources stress how central it is to identity, to feeling included, to just being able to participate in social life, especially when you're learning in that new language at school.
Makes perfect sense. If you're struggling to express yourself, your confidence takes a hit. Making friends becomes harder.
Exactly. And the London study gave some really vivid examples. They found several participants were actually scared to speak English.
Really? Scared.
Yeah, they'd often just stay silent rather than risk feeling self-conscious or making a mistake. And the study pointed out it can take a long time, sometimes more than 3 years, for newcomers to feel truly comfortable speaking English socially.
Wow. Over 3 years. That's a long time in a teenager's life.
It is. And it wasn't just English. One participant mentioned having a similar feeling, that kind of anxiety, even with a different Spanish dialect when they first moved to Spain.
It really puts the challenge into perspective. And there's another layer too, isn't there? The difference between everyday chat and school language.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Academic language, the words you need for textbooks, essays, classroom debates, that often develops much more slowly than conversational fluency.
So a teen might seem fine chatting with friends.
But still really struggle to understand complex lesson material or write an essay. It creates this gap, this hidden challenge for them.
Okay, another angle our sources look at is family. How migration affects family dynamics and maybe the responsibilities teens have.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Some sources suggest migrant teens might have less freedom than their peers. Their parents might be stricter, perhaps because they're less familiar or comfortable with the new environment themselves.
Which could actually hinder that exploration phase teenagers need, that trying on different identities thing.
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
What Eric Erickson called the psychosocial moratorium. If your opportunities to explore socially are limited, it can make that process trickier.
And the London study specifically found that the Latin American parents were often perceived as stricter than local British parents,
That's right, which, understandably, can lead to frustration for the teenagers. On top of that, these young people often take on significant extra responsibilities.
like translating for their parents.
Exactly, language brokering. Now, some studies suggest this can build confidence and skills, which is true, but others highlight the pressure it adds.
Especially on top of schoolwork and trying to have a social life.
It's a lot to juggle. It can impact their education and just their ability to be teenagers.
And sadly, alongside these internal family pressures, there's the external pressure of discrimination and stereotyping.
Yes, the evidence points to this being a real issue. Our sources mention migrant students facing discrimination in schools. Sometimes it seemed linked to wider political events or negative public attitudes.
The London study had some pretty stark examples, didn't it?
It did. Direct quotes from students who were told things like, go back to your country, and facing really painful stereotypes based purely on their nationality, like a Colombian student being called a drug addict.
That's just awful. And it seems like some things make them more vulnerable.
It appears so. Things like having a noticeable accent or simply being a more recent arrival unfortunately seem to be markers that can attract negative attention or discrimination.
Now, what about teens who have, say, lived in multiple countries before arriving in the current one? Like born in Latin America, lived in Spain, now in the UK.
That adds yet another layer of complexity, definitely. Their identity journey is even more intricate.
I can imagine. There might be disconnects with parents, too.
Yes, parents might have certain expectations based on their own migration path, which might not match the emotional reality the teenager is facing with this transition, or the cumulative effect of multiple moves.
So they're juggling maybe a third culture, trying to fit into different communities.
Exactly. And the sources show varying ways they connect with, say, Latino communities at school or locally, while also adapting to the mainstream British culture. It's not uniform.
Interestingly, though, some felt they could actively shape their identity.
Yes, that came through in the London study. Some participants felt their personal interests, their hobbies, were more defining for them than a specific cultural label. They saw identity as something more fluid, something that they had some control over.
But others felt a strong connection to their heritage.
Oh, absolutely. Many expressed real pride in their Latin American background and roots, so it's diverse.
Despite all these challenges, the emotional toll, the language barriers, the discrimination, it sounds like education, remains a really strong focus for these young people.
That's a powerful takeaway, yes. Education was seen by the participants, particularly in the London study, as incredibly important. A pathway to future success, a way to perhaps counteract negative stereotypes.
A source of hope, maybe?
Definitely. Although we have to remember, as we discussed, those language difficulties can sometimes overshadow those bigger aspirations, at least for a period.
Right. So if we try to bring all these threads together, what we're really seeing is that the already complex process of figuring out who you are as a teen becomes incredibly multifaceted when migration is involved.
Absolutely. We've touched on, navigating new cultural rules, the way identities become layered or hybrid, those constant transnational connections thanks to tech, the very real emotional struggles.
The huge role of language, the changing family dynamics, and sadly, the impact of discrimination. They all intertwine.
It shows these teenagers aren't just new kids. They are actively doing significant identity work, often under really challenging circumstances. It's identity in motion.
Which really leads us to a final thought, something for you, our listeners, to reflect on.
Considering all these influences we've discussed, the cultural shifts, the hybridity, the connections, the emotional weight, language, family, discrimination, how might a deeper appreciation of these experiences actually change how we support young people?
You mean in our communities and our schools?
Exactly. How can we better support them as they navigate these cross-cultural transitions, as they shape their identities in a world that's only getting more interconnected? Perhaps it's time we took a hard look at the resources, the understanding, the welcome we truly offer.